Have you ever wondered why some women linger in a man's mind long after their presence has vanished, like an echo that refuses to fade? This is not mere attraction, nor the fleeting spark of desire. It is something deeper, something rooted in the unseen architecture of the psyche. The silent woman who haunts is not defined by her words, nor by the ways she yields or contorts to meet expectation. She is defined by the spaces she leaves, the shadows she stirs, and the unspoken gravity of her own being. She operates in a realm beyond superficial intimacy, in the territory where the unconscious meets reality, where desire is entangled with projection, and where the male mind confronts both its yearning and its fear. In every man who encounters her, there is a subtle, often unnoticed shift. He is compelled not by the fleeting novelty of beauty or charm, but by a disturbance in his habitual sense of self, a confrontation with the parts of him he has refused to see. She becomes a mirror of his shadow, reflecting not only his desires but also the parts of himself he has neglected, suppressed, or denied. In the quiet of her presence, he senses the unacknowledged, the parts of his psyche that crave understanding yet fear revelation. This silent woman is not merely enigmatic, she is psychologically catalytic, a force that stirs both awe and unrest. You watching this now may recognize the subtle tension. The man who remembers her, who revisits her face in thought, does so because she resists the gravitational pull of expectation. She is not tethered to the scripts of attention-seeking, approval-garnering, or performative affection. She acts, moves, and exists in accordance with her inner compass, and in this autonomy lies her power. Jung might say she embodies the archetype of the anima in its most compelling form, an image that cannot be possessed, yet profoundly shapes the masculine psyche simply by being. Every gaze he casts toward her, every fleeting memory he traces, becomes a confrontation with his own incompleteness, his own need to reconcile with the depth of his unconscious. Her silence is more than absence, it is a language. In every pause, every unspoken thought, she speaks to the primal rhythms of connection, trust, and self-recognition. She does not fill the spaces with noise. She invites presence, reflection, and ultimately transformation. A man attempting to pursue her must contend not with her body or her smile, but with his own internal dissonance. Every effort to define her, to categorize her, to dominate her attention, reveals not her limitations but his own projections. He begins to understand, sometimes too late, that desire without recognition of one's own shadow is hollow. She challenges him to meet himself fully, or risk the emptiness of chasing that which cannot be grasped. Imagine the intensity of being in her orbit. It is at once intoxicating and terrifying. She does not perform vulnerability. She is vulnerable in the profound, invisible way that aligns with truth rather than expectation. Men often mistake her calm detachment for indifference, yet it is not indifference, it is sovereignty. Her life is not a stage for admiration but a canvas of self-possession, painted with the quiet confidence of one who knows that the truest connection is born from authenticity, not dependence. Every man who feels haunted by her presence senses this distinction instinctively, and therein lies the haunting. It is not her love that lingers, it is her integrity, the echo of a self that refuses to be diminished. The silent woman's power is also temporal. She does not chase, she does not linger in desperation, and she does not demand attention. Yet every absence is an invitation for reflection, and every boundary she sets becomes a doorway to the depths of desire itself. Men are confronted with a paradox. The more they seek to contain her, the further she recedes. The more they attempt to label her, the more elusive she becomes. In this dynamic lies an archetypal lesson, that love, attention, and connection cannot be coerced. They can only emerge when each individual confronts their shadow, embraces their own wholeness, and meets the other as they truly are. And so, in the dim spaces between encounters, in the quiet corridors of memory and imagination, she resides, not as possession, not as conquest, but as a force of subtle, relentless transformation. The man haunted by her is haunted not by loss but by awakening. He feels, in the silent resonance of her being, the stirrings of what it means to confront one's own ego, to witness projection, and to navigate desire with a temperance of stoic awareness. Marcus Aurelius might observe that he cannot control her presence, only his response. Epictetus would remind him that freedom lies not in holding her, but in understanding himself in relation to her. And in this tension between longing and comprehension, he is drawn into the very shadow work she embodies effortlessly. There is a subtle alchemy in the way she moves through the world, a rhythm unhurried, a presence that bends neither to expectation nor to fear. Her silence is an instrument, each pause a note resonating with depth, calling the male unconscious to reckon with itself. In the theater of desire, she is both stage and audience, observer and catalyst, teaching without instruction, revealing without explanation. A man senses her power not in what she gives but in what she withholds, not in her consent but in the gravity of her indifference, which is never cruelty, only fidelity to herself. The more he chases, the more the mirror of his inadequacy shimmers back at him. In her quietude, he discovers the parts of himself he has long ignored, the yearning for authenticity, the hunger for respect, the ache of incompleteness. She awakens a particular form of longing, one not satiated by possession, attention, or fleeting intimacy. This is the desire that pierces the ordinary, the kind that confronts a man with the limitations of his ego. He may attempt to define her through words, through gestures, through the familiar currency of pursuit, but she exists beyond the arithmetic of attraction. Her psyche is unbound by convention, her essence unquantifiable, and her presence a living testament to individuation. Jungian analysis would suggest that she embodies the unassimilated anima, the archetypal image of womanhood that refuses simplification, reflecting the man's need to reconcile with the disowned parts of his self. The man who encounters her often oscillates between fascination and fear. He is captivated by her unknowability, yet terrified of the mirror she holds up to his own limitations. His desire becomes entwined with projection. She is no longer merely a person, but a canvas for his hopes, his fears, his unlived potentials. Her silence is a lens through which he examines himself, a subtle invitation to maturity, an unspoken ultimatum. Do you know who you are, or do you merely chase the illusion of completeness in another? She teaches the hard lesson that attraction, when untethered from self-awareness, becomes a vessel for the ego's hunger, a theater of shadow enacted unknowingly. You may feel this now in your own reflections, in the way certain presences imprint themselves on memory, refusing to dissolve despite time, distance, or circumstance. This is not magic, and it is not manipulation. It is psychological resonance, a force born of depth, of alignment, of unwavering self-possession. She does not appeal to vanity, nor does she flatter. Her power is in her integrity, the unassailable truth of a soul that does not barter for validation. Every man who senses her impact confronts the dissonance between what he desires and what he deserves. And in that confrontation lies the haunting, not by her absence, but by the echo of a presence that mirrors his inner truth. Her strength is often mistaken for detachment, yet it is rooted in profound vulnerability, the courage to be oneself without compromise, to honor one's own boundaries even when the world demands concession. In her quiet strength, she models the ultimate paradox. Power does not roar, it whispers, it waits, it draws inward before it radiates outward. Seneca might counsel that her serenity is virtue made manifest, that her calm in the face of desire is the mark of wisdom. Epictetus would observe that she cannot be possessed, nor should she be, for freedom is her native state. And as the man wrestles with his fascination, he learns a truth often denied in the frenzy of pursuit. What he seeks outside, he must cultivate within. She exists in thresholds, between intimacy and autonomy, presence and absence, longing and understanding. Her allure is inseparable from the challenge she presents, to confront shadow, to wrestle with projection, to face the ego with honesty. Men are compelled, not because of her compliance, but because she illuminates the voids in their own character. Her silence is an invitation to transformation, her absence a prompt for reflection. Desire becomes less about possession and more about awakening, less about conquest and more about comprehension. In this way she haunts, not to torment, but to instruct, to awaken, to elevate. In the rhythm of life, her impact lingers long after the encounter, in the quiet spaces of thought, in the restless cadence of longing. She teaches the unspoken curriculum of depth, that true connection is never transactional, that autonomy is magnetic, and that the psyche cannot be hurried into understanding. In every man who remembers her, there is a tension between yearning and enlightenment, between shadow and realization. And within that tension lies the ultimate transformation, the recognition that the silent woman is not merely an object of fascination, but a mirror, a teacher, a force calling the masculine psyche to awaken, integrate, and evolve. Her presence lingers in ways that defy simple memory, not because of what she gives, but because of what she embodies, an unwavering allegiance to self. She moves through life as if guided by an inner compass, one calibrated by authenticity, introspection, and emotional sovereignty. Every man who notices her senses a subtle disturbance, a gravitational shift in his own internal landscape. He may not immediately comprehend it, but there is a pull toward something larger than desire, toward recognition of the unclaimed territories within himself. She does not speak volumes, yet her silence resonates with the clarity of a bell struck in the deep chambers of the unconscious. Each unspoken word, each deliberate pause, becomes a touchstone for reflection, an invitation to meet himself honestly. It is here that her haunting becomes transformative rather than merely frustrating. Men who encounter her are drawn into a mirror of their own incompleteness. She reflects not their superficial desires but their unacknowledged needs, the courage to face fear, the discipline to honor boundaries, the clarity to distinguish between dependence and authentic connection. Her silence forces the masculine psyche to reckon with projection. Every attempt to claim her attention reveals more about his ego than about her. She embodies what Carl Jung described as the living anima, the archetypal feminine force that awakens the unconscious, stirring both longing and insight. In attempting to capture her, he is captured instead by the reflection of himself he cannot ignore. You, observing this pattern, may sense the familiar tension. The man who cannot let go is not haunted by loss, but by the awakening she incites. The intensity he feels is not mere fascination. It is the pulse of individuation calling him to confront the dissonance between desire and growth, between projection and reality. The silent woman's influence is subtle, yet it penetrates the psyche with precision. She does not manipulate, she does not coerce. Her power resides in presence and self-possession, qualities that demand acknowledgement not through words, but through the realization that one's own shadow must be confronted to engage with her fully. There is a delicate paradox in her allure. She is simultaneously accessible and unattainable. A man who truly encounters her learns that the path to connection does not lie in pursuit, but in introspection. Every effort to dominate, define, or confine her is met with the inevitability of resistance, not because she resists him, but because she resists compromise of her essence. In this resistance lies her profound teaching. Attraction devoid of authenticity is hollow, attention without understanding is fleeting, and desire untempered by reflection is blind. Through her, the masculine mind experiences the friction between longing and wisdom, between the ego's clamor and the deeper call of consciousness. Her autonomy is not absence. It is articulation of selfhood in its purest form. She does not speak to impress or to be validated. She speaks and acts as the embodiment of integrity. Each boundary she maintains is not a rejection of others, but a declaration of her own values. The man who notices her begins to discern the patterns within himself, the impulse to control, the habit of projection, the hunger for external validation. These impulses, when reflected against her unwavering self-possession, illuminate the path towards psychological maturity. He learns that the magnetic pull she exerts is less about her and more about the alignment of his own inner world. Imagine the quiet intensity of her gaze, not filled with expectation but with presence. Imagine the way her gestures, measured, deliberate, authentic, speak volumes where words fail. Her silence becomes a language of its own, translating truths about self-worth, resilience, and emotional sovereignty that cannot be reduced to conversation. Men are captivated because she embodies what they unconsciously seek, a woman who exists fully in herself, whose energy is undiluted by need, whose allure is inseparable from her wholeness. She is the living paradox of desire, close enough to inspire longing, yet distant enough to demand introspection. Through every encounter, every remembered glance, every trace of her in thought, she leaves an indelible imprint, a reminder that the deepest attraction is not a function of possession, but of recognition. The man haunted by her cannot escape the invitation she offers, to meet himself fully, to reckon with shadow, to embrace growth, and to approach desire with clarity rather than compulsion. In this way, the silent woman who haunts is both mirror and teacher, both challenge and liberation. She exists in a realm where time feels elastic, where presence is felt as much in absence as in being. The man haunted by her is caught in this liminal space, suspended between longing and insight. He recalls the cadence of her movements, the way her silence shapes the air around her, the way her eyes carry an unspoken invitation to witness reality beyond illusion. He may try to explain it, rationalize it, or dismiss it as fantasy, yet the pull remains undeniable. It is not merely desire that tethers him, but confrontation, the encounter with a depth he has seldom approached in himself. Jung would note that such a woman embodies the living archetype of transformation. She does not merely reflect the shadow, she catalyzes its integration, guiding the masculine psyche toward completeness through the resonance of her being. In the shadow of her presence, the man confronts his habitual need for control. He notices the futility of chasing, the hollowness of clinging. Each attempt to grasp her attention exposes the fissures in his own ego, the unhealed wounds, and the projections he has mistaken for longing. She teaches without instruction, without explicit effort, because her very existence is an enactment of truth. He begins to understand that attraction is not a conquest, that desire is not possession, and that intimacy is born not from pursuit but from alignment of self with self. Her haunting is the alchemy of psychological awakening. The discomfort of longing becomes the crucible for growth, the tension between presence and absence forges insight, and the reflection of one's shadow illuminates the path to maturity. You may feel the edges of this now, sensing how certain presences linger in memory long after the physical encounter has ended. These women are not ephemeral. They are timeless in impact because they anchor themselves in the psychology of those they touch. Their silence is intentional, their boundaries unwavering, their authenticity unassailable. And in this, there is both liberation and terror for the man who meets her. Liberation, because he is invited to evolve. Terror, because evolution demands surrender of control, of expectation, and of illusions he has built around desire. The silent woman, in her autonomy, exposes the essential truths that men often evade, that longing must be tempered with introspection, that projection distorts perception, and that the deepest connection is not one of possession but of resonance. She embodies a paradox that is both magnetic and disarming. Her allure is not in compliance but in sovereignty, not in concession but in alignment. Every interaction, every fleeting moment, is a lesson in recognition, that power manifests quietly, that presence can be transformative without effort, and that desire, when unaccompanied by self-awareness, becomes a shadow that haunts as much as it inspires. In this way, she haunts not to torment but to awaken, not to control, but to illuminate the inner landscapes that men have yet to explore. Her silence is not emptiness, it is full, resonant, instructive. Each pause, each measured gesture, is a catalyst for reflection, compelling the man to examine the textures of his own longing and the contours of his shadow. There is also a subtle artistry in the way she cultivates her presence, an economy of action, a precision in engagement, a refusal to dilute herself to meet external expectation. She understands instinctively and profoundly that attraction without integrity is hollow, that attention without authenticity is fleeting, and that influence without inner grounding is empty. Men sense this immediately. It is a form of psychological gravity. They are drawn not merely to her, but to what she represents, the unshakable alignment of being with truth. Her impact lingers because it is not superficial. It pierces the habitual narratives of the psyche, forcing reconsideration of what it means to desire, to pursue, and ultimately, to love with clarity. In the echoes of memory, in the quiet after her absence, the man begins to see himself anew. The lessons she imparts are subtle, unspoken, and yet profound. Desire becomes an instrument of self-reflection rather than mere longing. The shadow he confronts is no longer frightening but instructive. Every moment of haunting serves as a mirror, revealing unacknowledged truths, unfinished growth, and the potential for transformation. She is both muse and teacher, presence and absence, challenge and awakening. Her silence, her autonomy, and her unwavering fidelity to self create a psychological landscape in which men are compelled to evolve or remain adrift in projection. Her presence is a threshold, a liminal space where the ordinary rules of attraction dissolve into the extraordinary psychology of longing and self-recognition. The man haunted by her discovers that what he felt as fascination was, in truth, a confrontation with himself. Every glance, every silence, every measured gesture becomes a probe into the unexamined corners of his psyche. He is challenged to discern between authentic desire and projection, between longing for connection and yearning for control. The silent woman exposes the structures of ego, revealing how often they govern pursuit, distort perception, and obscure truth. In this, she is not cruel. She is an instrument of awakening, precise and unyielding in her power. She moves as though time itself bends to her understanding of life, deliberate yet unhurried, engaged yet free. There is a rhythm to her existence that men feel viscerally, even if they cannot articulate it. It is a rhythm of sovereignty, of presence that is complete in itself. Her silence is a language, her stillness a curriculum. In attempting to possess her, a man inadvertently enters a classroom he did not know he needed, a classroom of shadow, projection, and the rigorous discipline of individuation. Jung would observe that she embodies the anima in its most potent form, not a muse to be conquered, but a living archetype demanding recognition, introspection, and psychological courage. You may feel the subtle pull yourself, as though the memory of such a woman is less a recollection and more an imprint upon the psyche. The intensity of her impact is not predicated on romance, beauty, or charm alone. It is anchored in the alignment of self with truth, the quiet authority of emotional sovereignty, and the insistence on integrity over indulgence. Men are haunted because they encounter a mirror they cannot avoid, their own incompleteness, their unintegrated shadow, their neglected potential. She is a reflection and a challenge, an echo that provokes introspection, a presence that transforms longing into understanding. The paradox of her power lies in its non-assertion. She does not pursue, manipulate, or perform. Her autonomy is magnetic precisely because it resists the conventional forms of appeal. Every attempt to control, to define, to contain her, only emphasizes the emptiness of chasing what cannot be coerced. She models a truth often lost in the turbulence of desire. Connection arises not from grasping but from alignment, not from demand but from reflection, not from pursuit but from the integration of shadow and consciousness. Her silence teaches that the deepest longing is not for another, but for one's own wholeness. There is a stoic dimension to her influence. Like a rock unmoved by wind, she embodies inner stability and freedom. Marcus Aurelius would recognize in her demeanor the wisdom of self-governance. Epictetus would note her understanding that the external world cannot dictate the contours of virtue. She exercises the same principle in relationships. She cannot be owned, she cannot be manipulated, and she will not compromise her essence to satisfy desire. Her autonomy forces the man to confront his attachments, his projections, and the illusions he has cultivated around intimacy. Through her, he learns that true connection cannot arise from dependency or compulsion, but from the disciplined cultivation of selfhood. Imagine the tension she evokes, the magnetic pull of presence, tempered by the impossibility of possession. Men often mistake this for aloofness or indifference, yet it is deliberate, intentional, and profound. Her essence is not diminished by her refusal to perform, it is amplified. In her orbit, a man experiences both longing and liberation, the yearning to possess and the revelation that only by meeting himself fully can he approach her without distortion. She teaches that the pursuit of self-understanding is the only path to meaningful engagement, that desire untethered from reflection is shadow, and that autonomy is not separation but integrity. Even in absence, she resonates. Memory of her gestures, her pauses, her silent authority becomes a force that continues to shape consciousness. The man haunted by her does not merely recall, he reflects, he integrates, he transforms. Her impact lingers because it is rooted in the psyche, not in circumstance, in essence, not in performance, in truth, not in fleeting charm. She is the living embodiment of a principle often lost in human connection, that the magnetic force of a soul aligned with itself transcends the superficialities of attention, desire, and fleeting attachment. In every trace she leaves, she demands that he examine his shadow, confront projection, and awaken to the gravity of authentic being. She moves through the world as a silent current, invisible yet profoundly felt, her influence spreading without effort, her presence shaping the psyche of those who encounter her long after she is gone. Every man who remembers her senses a subtle but undeniable shift within himself, a stirring of awareness, a tremor in the foundations of ego, a recognition that what he thought was desire was only the reflection of what he had not yet reconciled inside. She is not an object of pursuit, she is a mirror, a catalyst, a living embodiment of the tension between longing and growth. In her quiet, deliberate existence, she teaches the deepest lessons of attraction, that the power of presence outweighs the seduction of words, that authenticity cannot be simulated, and that emotional sovereignty commands respect without demanding it. Her silence is her language, and it is a language that penetrates the defenses of the psyche. In every pause, every unspoken word, she communicates what cannot be uttered, the value of self-possession, the necessity of boundaries, and the subtle gravity of inner alignment. A man attempting to capture her attention is inevitably drawn into a confrontation with himself. His projections, desires, fears, and unintegrated shadow aspects surface, reflected back in the subtle mirror of her being. She does not instruct, she does not admonish, she simply exists, and in her existence, the truth becomes undeniable. To be haunted by her is to be awakened, and to awaken is to confront the depths of one's own consciousness. You, observing this now, can understand why such a woman lingers long after the physical encounter ends. It is not her beauty, nor the charm of her smile, nor the timbre of her voice. It is the authenticity of her presence. She inhabits herself fully, unbowed by expectation, undistracted by the need for validation. Every man who senses her impact feels it in the subtle disturbance of his own psyche, the pull toward reflection and self-examination. He is haunted because she embodies a principle often missing in human connection, that true magnetism arises from the integrity of being, not from manipulation, compliance, or artifice. Her autonomy is both her armor and her allure. She does not pursue, she does not plead, she does not negotiate her essence for approval. In this unwavering fidelity to herself lies the source of her power. Every attempt to possess her, to define her, to make her an object of desire, collapses in the face of her sovereignty. Jung would recognize this as the living anima, the archetypal feminine force that awakens the unconscious, compelling a man to reconcile with his shadow, to acknowledge projection, and to approach connection with maturity and presence. Her haunting is a psychological inevitability for those who encounter her. The ego is confronted, the soul stirred, and the path toward integration illuminated. There is a stoic wisdom embedded in her presence. Like a calm lighthouse in a storm, she demonstrates that serenity and strength coexist, that detachment is not apathy, and that freedom is inseparable from integrity. Marcus Aurelius might observe that her calm is a reflection of virtue, and Epictetus would note her refusal to allow external circumstances to dictate her being. She teaches without effort that desire is not about possession but reflection, that longing without awareness is shadow, and that the most profound connection emerges only when each individual meets themselves fully. In her orbit, men confront the inadequacy of control and the necessity of self-discipline. The tension she evokes is exquisite. He is drawn to her not because she yields, but because she reflects a possibility he has yet to realize within himself. The allure is not fleeting, it is anchored in the architecture of the psyche. Every remembered gesture, every echo of her presence, every lingering thought serves as a mirror, revealing unintegrated shadow, unacknowledged longing, and the potential for transformation. Her haunting is not torment, it is initiation into a higher form of relational consciousness, where desire, projection, and ego are reconciled with authenticity and reflection. Even in absence, she radiates presence. Memory of her becomes a force, shaping thought, stirring introspection, and compelling growth. Men who feel haunted by her are not merely recalling a person, they are encountering the living embodiment of what is required for their own individuation, confrontation with shadow, recognition of projection, and the cultivation of self-alignment. She is the silent teacher, the unwavering mirror, the presence that cannot be possessed but whose lessons echo infinitely. In the dance between longing and awakening, she exists as both challenge and liberation, both reflection and transformation. Her influence extends beyond mere fascination. It is transformative, shaping not only desire but consciousness itself. The man haunted by her realizes, often too late, that what he sought externally was never in her to give. It was within himself, waiting to be awakened. She is a catalyst for introspection, a force that unmasks illusions of control and exposes the hollows of ego-driven longing. In her presence, he confronts the parts of himself he has denied, fear, insecurity, projection, and the unresolved cravings for validation. Every encounter with her, every remembered smile or silence, becomes a meditation on authenticity and integrity. She exists not to fill voids, but to illuminate them, to compel the observer to look inward and reconcile the shadows he has long evaded. Her aura is not seductive in the conventional sense. It is compelling because it is whole, unfragmented, and self-contained. She does not bend to expectation, she does not perform to please, and she does not barter her essence for attention. A man may mistake her autonomy for indifference, yet her detachment is deliberate, a manifestation of sovereignty. Jung would argue that she embodies the archetype of the transcendent feminine, a presence that cannot be possessed but whose mere being awakens latent desires for depth, maturity, and integration. Her haunting is not about manipulation, it is about revelation. She reveals the dissonance between desire and awareness, between projection and reality, between longing and the authentic self. You can sense it, the tension she evokes, the pull toward reflection, the awareness that desire without comprehension is incomplete. Her silence speaks volumes, each pause a mirror reflecting the unexamined terrains of the masculine psyche. The man who feels her presence becomes acutely aware of his projections, his attachments, and the illusions he has built around intimacy. She compels him to confront these patterns, to discern between genuine connection and egoic craving, to recognize that attraction, when untempered by self-awareness, is merely a rehearsal of the shadow. Her effect is not transient, it is enduring, etched into memory and psyche alike, shaping not only how he views her, but how he views himself. There is a stoic undertone to her influence. She models the power of detachment, the strength of self-possession, and the serenity of alignment. Marcus Aurelius would recognize her calm as the reflection of virtue, Epictetus would acknowledge her refusal to allow external validation to dictate her being. Her autonomy is magnetic precisely because it embodies freedom without defensiveness, strength without aggression, and clarity without coercion. Men are drawn to her not to conquer, but to understand, to reconcile their own shadows and awaken to the depth that exists beyond superficial desire. In the memory of her presence, a man begins to feel both longing and liberation. He is captivated by what he cannot possess, yet compelled to confront the internal landscapes her presence illuminates. Each recollection of her, whether a glance, a wordless exchange, or an echo of her energy, serves as a mirror, reflecting insecurities, projections, and unrealized potential. She is both muse and teacher, a force that compels introspection and integration. Through her, the masculine psyche learns the paradox of attraction. The closer one attempts to grasp, the further the essence retreats. The more one pursues without reflection, the more the mirror reveals the shadow. Her haunting is subtle but inexorable. Even in absence, she shapes thought and behavior, guiding the man towards self-recognition and awakening. The magnetism she exerts is not in charm, flattery, or physical allure, but in the gravity of a soul fully aligned with itself. She embodies the principle that authenticity is irresistible, and that the power of presence transcends the superficialities of pursuit. Men are left not with possession, but with reflection, not with conquest, but with confrontation, not with fleeting satisfaction, but with an invitation to evolve. And so she exists in the liminal spaces of memory and psyche, neither diminished by absence nor exaggerated by presence. Her power lies in unwavering self-possession, in the unspoken lessons her being conveys, in the psychological mirror she holds to those who seek to understand her. In haunting, she teaches. In silence, she instructs. In autonomy, she reveals the path toward wholeness, integrity, and awakening. She is not an object of desire, but a force of transformation. She is a paradox, at once near and impossibly distant, a presence that lingers in thought long after the body has moved on. Every man who senses her feels the subtle disturbance of consciousness, the quiet invitation to step beyond ego and projection. She does not demand attention, yet commands it. She does not perform affection, yet elicits longing. In this tension lies her power, the kind that cannot be seized, only witnessed, internalized, and ultimately understood. She forces a reckoning with desire, not the superficial hunger of need, but the profound call to integrate shadow, to confront the unconscious, and to meet the self fully. Jung might say she awakens what has been dormant, a confrontation with the masculine anima that both frightens and entices. Her silence is a language of its own, precise and unwavering. Each pause, each measured gesture, each glance carries a weight that cannot be quantified. It is not emptiness, but fullness, not detachment, but alignment. The man who attempts to possess her realizes, in the slow grinding of thought and longing, that he is confronting not her but himself. Projection becomes unavoidable, reflection unavoidable, insight inevitable. He comes to understand that she is not an object to acquire, but a mirror of truth, a living embodiment of what it means to be whole, autonomous, and aligned with inner reality. You may feel this now, sensing the way her energy imprints upon consciousness. Her autonomy is magnetic because it is complete. Her presence is haunting because it exposes incompleteness. Men do not merely remember her, they remember the awakening she incites. Her lessons are unspoken yet indelible. The desire must be tempered with awareness, that attraction is never about control, and that the deepest connection emerges only when egoic impulses are recognized and integrated. She teaches that the pursuit of another is futile without pursuit of the self, that longing untempered by reflection becomes shadow, and that the woman who haunts is not the one who resists, but the one who embodies unshakable integrity. There is a stoic resonance to her influence. Like an unmoving mountain, she embodies the principle that external circumstances cannot dictate the state of being. Marcus Aurelius might admire the tranquility of her presence, Epictetus the freedom it models. She demonstrates that emotional sovereignty is magnetic, that detachment is not rejection, and that power need not be loud to be absolute. Every man who experiences her feels the pull of this paradox: closeness without control, intimacy without compromise, desire without possession. Her autonomy is a quiet law of gravity, shaping thought and action with imperceptible yet undeniable force. Her haunting is transformational, not tormenting. Memory of her gestures, her pauses, her deliberate engagement becomes an instrument of reflection. The man who recalls her is confronted with the architecture of his own psyche: projections, unhealed wounds, suppressed shadow, and the hunger for authenticity. Desire becomes less about possession and more about comprehension. Longing transforms into insight. Fascination becomes the vehicle for psychological awakening. She is not merely remembered, she is internalized, her essence informing thought, behavior, and understanding long after direct contact has ceased. Imagine the quiet force she wields, a presence unbound by expectation, a being fully aligned with herself. She is near enough to inspire yearning, distant enough to compel introspection. Her power is subtle, relentless, and profoundly instructive. The man who is haunted by her begins to navigate his own inner landscape with new attention, recognizing the futility of chasing without reflection, the dangers of attachment without awareness, and the necessity of embracing his shadow to engage meaningfully with the world. She is muse and teacher, presence and mirror, allure and liberation intertwined. Even when absent, her energy persists, shaping consciousness in ways invisible yet undeniable. She demonstrates that the most profound influence arises not from compliance or charm, but from the alignment of being with truth. Her lessons resonate across time and thought. Attraction is not about conquest, desire is not about control, and connection is not about validation. She embodies the principle that the deepest magnetism stems from wholeness, autonomy, and integrity. The man who remembers her cannot escape the call to awaken, to integrate, and to pursue not her, but himself. In the final measure of her influence, she is no longer a presence to chase or a memory to cling to. She exists fully in herself, unbound by expectation, untouched by desire for approval, and unwavering in her sovereignty. The man who once felt haunted comes to recognize that the power she wielded was never over him. It was within her, and it illuminated the path he needed to walk alone. Every echo of her silence, every remembered glance, every trace of her energy has served its purpose: to teach him the value of integrity, the necessity of confronting shadow, and the liberation that arises when longing is redirected inward toward self-mastery. She has taught without speaking that attachment diminishes, that desire, when untethered from self-awareness, becomes shadow, that validation sought externally is fleeting. Her haunting dissolves not because she vanishes, but because the man she once stirred has begun to meet himself fully, reconcile his projections, and embrace the authenticity she embodied effortlessly. In this space, longing transforms into clarity, fascination into understanding, and absence into freedom. The woman who haunts is a force of awakening, but her ultimate gift is the reminder that wholeness cannot be found in another. It must be cultivated within. She is the teacher of autonomy, the mirror of shadow, the embodiment of a truth too often denied, that power, presence, and allure originate from alignment with oneself. And in the quiet of this realization, there is peace, detachment, and the unshakable joy of self-possession. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.